The first time Oliver publicly humiliated me during a meeting, he smiled while doing it. That was his specialty. He never raised his voice, never openly insulted women in ways HR could easily document. Instead, he mastered something much more dangerous, making women feel smaller while convincing everyone else he was simply challenging ideas. And unfortunately, our company rewarded men like him for years. My name is Sasha Bennett, and for 7 years I worked at Norvale Consulting, a mid-sized business strategy firm in downtown Seattle. From the outside, the company looked progressive. Modern office, diversity campaigns, professional leadership culture, LinkedIn posts about inclusion. But internally, every executive position was held by a man. Every single one. Women handled operations, analytics, client communication, crisis management, scheduling, presentations, and retention. Men got titles. Men got authority. Men got promoted. And Oliver Reed thrived in that environment. Officially, Oliver was our regional director. Unofficially, he was the type of boss who believed women were useful until leadership became involved. You could feel it in subtle ways. Men interrupted women during meetings. Oliver laughed. A male employee repeated a woman's idea 5 minutes later. Oliver called it strong initiative. Women stayed late fixing disasters? Expected. Men stayed late once? Leadership potential. None of it was dramatic enough individually to report. That's why he survived professionally for so long. Because misogyny hidden beneath professionalism becomes almost impossible to prove. But every woman in that office felt it. Especially me. By the time this story started, I had already spent 7 years at Norvale. 7 years building client relationships. 7 years fixing projects other people damaged. 7 years becoming the person everyone secretly relied on when something went wrong. And everyone knew it. Even Oliver. Especially Oliver. That was the frustrating part. He respected my competence privately while refusing to reward it publicly. Whenever major clients requested me specifically, Oliver would smile tightly and say things like, "Sasha's very detail-oriented. Not strategic. Not leadership material. Not brilliant. Detail-oriented." The corporate word often used when women perform exceptional work men don't want to fully credit. Still, I kept working. Because deep down I believed eventually results would become impossible to ignore. Then Ethan arrived. 24 years old. Fresh out of graduate school. Smart, confident, charismatic. And completely inexperienced. He joined as a junior trainee under Oliver's department about a year before everything changed. First, I genuinely liked him. He asked questions. Stayed late. Took notes seriously. I even helped train him myself during his first few months. Which is why what happened afterward hurt so much. 6 months later, management announced a new operations leadership position. The role was practically designed around responsibilities I had already been handling unofficially for years. Everyone assumed I'd get it. Coworkers, clients, even people from other departments. One colleague literally told me, "If they give this to anyone else, this company is insane." Then Oliver promoted Ethan. I still remember sitting in the conference room while Oliver announced it casually like the decision made perfect sense. Ethan looked shocked himself. The room went strangely quiet afterward. Not angry quiet. Uncomfortable quiet. Because everyone knew. Even Ethan knew. After the meeting, 3 separate female coworkers came directly to my office. Edith was the first. "That was complete bullshit," she whispered immediately after closing my door. Then Monica from finance appeared 10 minutes later. "You should fight this." By lunch, even women from departments I barely interacted with were stopping by my desk pretending to discuss work while quietly saying versions of the same thing. "You deserved that role." One coworker even suggested filing an official discrimination complaint. And honestly, maybe I could have. People would have supported me. But the problem wasn't just the promotion. It was Oliver. I didn't want to force corporate correction. I didn't want HR pretending to care. I didn't want Ethan removed because of pressure. I wanted Oliver himself to understand he underestimated me. That mattered to me more. So I stayed quiet publicly and worked harder privately. Meanwhile, Ethan slowly transformed after the promotion. Not cruel exactly, but different. More confident. More dismissive. more comfortable speaking over people during meetings, especially women. Oliver encouraged it constantly. One afternoon during a strategy session, I corrected an error in Ethan's revenue forecast calculations. Nothing dramatic, just numbers. Ethan frowned slightly and said, "Well, that's one interpretation. One interpretation of math." Before I could answer, Oliver chuckled. "That's why collaboration matters." The two of them laughed lightly while the room sat awkwardly silent. I remember looking around the conference table, realizing every woman there had the exact same expression. Exhaustion. Not outrage. Not shock. Exhaustion. Because we'd all spent years navigating the same invisible wall. A month later, Edith sent me a message that changed everything. "Come to the parking garage now." I found her standing beside her car looking unusually nervous. "What happened?" She glanced around first before speaking. "I overheard the executive review meeting." Instantly my attention sharpened. "And?" Edith lowered her voice. "Oliver got warned." My pulse jumped slightly. What kind of warned? If company growth numbers don't improve within 3 months, they're replacing him. For several seconds I just stared at her. Because Norvale had struggled financially for almost a year. Client retention dropping. Revenue stagnating. Major competitors taking accounts. And apparently upper leadership finally lost patience. Edith crossed her arms. "There's more." Of course there was. The board announced an open leadership competition. I frowned. What does that mean? It means literally anyone in management-level operations can compete for regional director. I felt my heart start beating faster. Edith continued. 3 months. Submit a full recovery strategy, client expansion model, and financial growth presentation. I stared at her in disbelief. "You're serious?" She nodded slowly. "And Sasha?" Oliver apparently laughed. That sounded exactly like him. He told everyone nobody in this office has the spine to challenge him. Then Edith smiled slightly. "Especially not the women." Something cold and focused settled inside me at that exact moment. Because suddenly I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, Oliver genuinely believed his position was untouchable. Second, I was going to take it from him. Over the next 3 months, my entire life became work. I handled my normal responsibilities during the day, while secretly building my presentation every night after getting home. Client behavior analysis, revenue recovery models, retention restructuring, digital acquisition strategy, operational inefficiencies, staff utilization failures. I studied everything. Slept maybe 4 hours a night. Lived on coffee and stubbornness. Meanwhile, Oliver became even more arrogant. Every meeting turned into another performance about how secure his leadership was. One morning he actually smirked and said, "I hope nobody wastes too much personal time preparing fantasy presentations." Several men laughed immediately. Then Oliver added, "Leadership requires pressure tolerance. Not everyone is built for that environment." And as usual, his eyes drifted toward the women in the room while he said it. Nobody challenged him openly. But I noticed something important. More people were getting tired of him now. The closer we got to presentation day, the more unbearable Oliver became. Pressure exposed who people really were. And Oliver responded to pressure by tightening his grip on everyone around him, especially women. He started criticizing small things publicly during meetings, interrupting more aggressively, questioning ideas he previously ignored. One afternoon he stopped me halfway through a client performance update and said, "Sasha, sometimes your problem is that you overcomplicate things emotionally." Emotionally? I stared at him across the conference room table while complete silence settled around us. Because everyone there knew exactly what he meant. Or rather, what he wanted them to assume. That women think emotionally. Men think strategically. The oldest corporate trick imaginable. I answered calmly. "The projections come directly from our quarterly numbers." Oliver smiled slightly. "Yes, but presentation matters too." I almost laughed. Because I had watched this man present half-finished ideas confidently for years while women prepared the actual work behind them. But instead of arguing, I simply continued the report. That frustrated him more. The thing about men like Oliver is this. They expect emotional reactions. Because once women become visibly upset, suddenly the conversation shifts away from the actual issue. So I stopped reacting emotionally in public completely. And strangely enough, that made him more irritated than ever. Meanwhile, my project kept growing stronger. By then I had identified 3 major problems destroying Norvale's growth: outdated client acquisition methods, terrible communication between departments, and leadership culture built entirely around hierarchy instead of results. The third point mattered most. People at Norvale were exhausted. Talented employees kept leaving because promotions depended more on favoritism than performance. Especially for women. I knew it. Everyone knew it. But nobody had ever said it directly to upper leadership before. I was going to. About 3 weeks before final presentations, Ethan approached my desk unexpectedly late one evening. Most employees had already gone home. He looked uncomfortable immediately. "Can we talk?" I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Sure." For several seconds he just stood there awkwardly. Then finally, "I didn't realize things were this bad when Oliver promoted me." I stared at him quietly. "Interesting." Not, "I shouldn't have accepted it." Not, "You deserved it more." Just, "I didn't realize." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck nervously. At first I thought people were exaggerating. And now? He hesitated. Now I notice things. I almost asked, "Like what?" But honestly I already knew. The interruptions. The dismissiveness. The way Oliver praised confidence in men and teamwork in women. Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable now. He talks differently about female employees when executives aren't around. That surprised me less than it should have. Still, hearing another man finally acknowledge it felt strangely validating. "You could report it," I said calmly. Ethan laughed softly. "You know that won't go anywhere." Unfortunately, he was probably right. Because subtle misogyny survives precisely because it hides inside plausible deniability. Oliver never said, "Women are inferior." Instead he said, "Women communicate differently. Women bring emotional intelligence. Women thrive in support roles." Corporate sexism wrapped in polished language. Ethan shifted awkwardly again. "For what it's worth, I know you should have gotten my position." That sentence landed strangely in my chest. Not satisfying exactly. Just sad. Because his acknowledgement changed nothing about the last year. Still, I appreciated the honesty. "Thank you," I said quietly. Then after a pause, Ethan added something unexpected. "I think Oliver's scared of you." I blinked. "What?" "He acts threatened every time executives compliment your work." That thought followed me home that night. Because suddenly years of interaction started making more sense. Oliver respected competence. Until it challenged male authority. And my problem wasn't that I lacked leadership ability. My problem was that I had enough of it to make him nervous. The final week before presentations felt almost unreal. The entire office buzzed with tension and speculation. Some managers suddenly became unusually polite to executives. Others acted overly confident. Oliver acted untouchable. 2 days before the competition, he walked through the operations floor joking loudly. "I hope everyone enjoys participating in my recoronation." Several men laughed immediately. Then he added, "Confidence matters in leadership. That's why some people naturally rise while others assist." Again, his eyes briefly drifted toward me. And this time, I smiled back. That seemed to unsettle him slightly. Because for the first time in years I wasn't intimidated by him anymore. I knew something he didn't. I was better prepared. Presentation day arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. I barely slept the night before. Not from fear. From adrenaline. Every executive from headquarters attended in person. The atmosphere inside Norvale felt completely different that day. Sharper. More serious. Almost nervous. Candidates presented one at a time inside the main executive conference hall. Oliver went first. Of course he did. Confident. Polished. Predictable. His presentation focused mostly on maintaining stability and protecting company identity. Which sounded impressive until you realized stability was exactly what had been failing for the past year. Still, many people nodded politely while he spoke. Then came my turn. Walking toward the podium, I felt dozens of eyes following me across the room. Some supportive, some curious, some skeptical. Oliver leaned back in his chair looking almost amused, like this entire thing was entertainment to him. That confidence disappeared within 15 minutes. Because unlike Oliver, I wasn't presenting theories. I was presenting solutions built directly from problems employees live through every day. Client retention systems, internal restructuring, performance-based advancement, digital expansion, cross-department collaboration, staff leadership development, and finally, the cultural problem. I still remember the exact sentence I used. Companies stop growing the moment leadership becomes more focused on protecting authority than recognizing talent. The room went completely silent. I looked directly at the executive board while continuing calmly. When employees believe effort will never outweigh favoritism, innovation dies quietly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Oliver's expression change for the first time all morning. Not anger. Concern. Good. I continued for nearly 40 minutes. No shaking voice. No nervousness. No hesitation. Years of being underestimated had prepared me perfectly for that moment. Then came questions. And honestly, that's where everything changed. Because executives challenged every weakness in my plan aggressively. Revenue risks. Staff resistance. Budget concerns. Scaling difficulties. And I answered every single question confidently. Not because I memorized lines. Because I actually understood the company better than anyone else in that room, including Oliver. By the time I finished, the atmosphere had changed completely. People weren't politely listening anymore. They were paying attention. Real attention. As I returned to my seat, I noticed something almost surreal. Several women in the room looked emotional. One actually smiled at me like she'd been waiting years for someone to finally say those things out loud. Meanwhile, Oliver sat unusually still beside the executives. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncertain. The executive board spent the next 2 days reviewing proposals privately. And those 2 days were absolute torture. Nobody inside Norvale talked about anything else. People whispered near coffee machines. Managers suddenly acted nervous around executives. Employees tried guessing who would win based on tiny details like body language after meetings. Meanwhile, Oliver behaved like the outcome was already decided. That alone irritated me more than I expected. The morning after presentations, he walked into the operations office smiling arrogantly and announced, "Well, now that the little competition is over, we can get back to real work." A few people laughed awkwardly. Most stayed silent. Then Oliver looked directly at me and added, "You did well though, Sasha. Public speaking improves with practice." Practice. As if I hadn't just dismantled half his leadership model in front of corporate executives. I smiled politely. "Thanks, Oliver." That seemed to confuse him slightly. Because for the first time in years, his comments no longer affected me emotionally. And honestly, that terrified him more than anger ever could. Around lunchtime, Edith rushed into my office without knocking. Her face looked pale. "They're announcing it today." My heartbeat instantly accelerated. What? The decision. 4 o'clock. The next few hours passed painfully slowly. I barely touched my computer. Couldn't focus. Couldn't eat. Couldn't even drink coffee without my stomach twisting. And despite all my confidence, fear still lived underneath everything. Because deep down I knew this wasn't just about promotion anymore. It was about validation. About finally proving years of work mattered. About forcing people like Oliver to acknowledge something they spent years minimizing. At 3:55 p.m., the entire management division gathered inside the main conference hall. The atmosphere felt suffocating. Executives sat near the front. Department leaders lined both sides of the room. Employees stood quietly along the walls. Oliver sat confidently near the center table, one arm casually draped across his chair. Like a king waiting for another crown. Then CEO Richard Lawson stepped toward the podium. "Thank you all for your patience during this process." Corporate speech. Polite tone. Completely unreadable expression. I hated it already. Richard continued. The board reviewed every proposal carefully. Several candidates demonstrated strong ideas for Norvale's future. A long pause followed. Then finally. However, one presentation stood apart not only because of strategy, He glanced toward me briefly. But because of operational understanding, leadership vision, and long-term cultural sustainability, suddenly I couldn't breathe properly. Richard smiled slightly. Effective immediately, Sasha Bennett will become Regional Director of Norvale Consulting. The room exploded into applause. Actual applause. Loud. Overwhelming. For several seconds I sat frozen while everything around me blurred emotionally. Edith grabbed my arm beside me whispering, "Oh my God. Oh my God." Across the room I saw women smiling openly. Some looked stunned. Others looked vindicated. And Oliver? Oliver looked completely motionless. Not angry yet. Just shocked. Pure disbelief. Because for the first time in his career, the system he trusted hadn't protected him. Richard continued speaking, but honestly I barely heard half of it. Something about restructuring, leadership transition, growth implementation timeline. None of it felt real. Then came the sentence that changed the entire room. Oliver Reed will remain with Norvale during the transition period under the new regional leadership structure. Silence. Heavy silence. Because everyone immediately understood what that meant. Oliver wasn't just losing authority. He would now report to me. I looked toward him instinctively. His jaw tightened slightly, but he still forced a professional smile. That smile almost impressed me honestly. Even humiliated, he performed confidence. After the meeting ended, people surrounded me instantly. Congratulations. Handshakes. Excited whispers. I barely processed any of it. Then suddenly Oliver appeared beside me. The crowd quieted immediately. Of course it did. Everyone wanted to see this moment. Oliver extended his hand. "Congratulations, Sasha." His voice sounded controlled, careful. But underneath it, I heard humiliation burning alive. I shook his hand calmly. "Thank you." For several seconds neither of us let go. Then Oliver said quietly enough that only I could hear, "I hope you know leadership feels very different once responsibility becomes real." I met his eyes directly. "I already know," I answered softly. "That's why I'll be good at it." For the first time ever. Oliver had absolutely nothing to say back. The following Monday became my official first day as regional director. Walking into that office felt surreal. Not triumphant exactly. Heavier than that. Because suddenly the responsibility became real. Budgets. Staff. Performance. Clients. Decisions affecting hundreds of people. And unlike Oliver, I understood leadership wasn't about status. It was about responsibility. At 9 a.m. sharp, Oliver entered my office for our first transition meeting. Still perfectly dressed. Still composed. But different. Quieter somehow. I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Morning, Oliver." "Sasha." The tension in the room felt almost physical. For years this man interrupted me, underestimated me, and treated leadership like something women naturally lacked. Now he sat waiting for my direction. Life is strange sometimes. We reviewed transition logistics for nearly 40 minutes professionally. No arguments. No passive-aggressive comments. No games. Until near the end, Oliver finally asked, "So what exactly will my role be moving forward?" There it was. The question he'd been avoiding emotionally all week. I closed the folder calmly. "I need someone overseeing executive coordination, reporting systems, and departmental communication." Oliver nodded slowly. "Important work. But no authority." Then I added, "You'll report directly to me." The silence afterward felt enormous. Not because I wanted revenge. Honestly, that surprised people most afterward. I didn't humiliate him. Didn't mock him. Didn't treat him the way he treated women for years. Because becoming Oliver would have ruined the entire point. Still, I'd be lying if I said the irony wasn't satisfying. Especially during meetings. The first time Oliver presented quarterly reports while sitting beside the other department coordinators instead of leading the room, I caught several women exchanging subtle looks. Not cruel. Just stunned. One afternoon Edith walked into my office smiling. "You realize every woman in this company sees you differently now, right?" I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You proved the problem was never capability." That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. Women at Norvale had always been qualified. The system simply rewarded confidence in men, while demanding perfection from women. Over the following months, I changed hiring structures completely. Transparent promotion reviews, blind performance evaluations, leadership mentorship programs, cross-department advancement tracking. And strangely enough, the company improved almost immediately. Employee retention increased. Client satisfaction improved. Revenue started climbing again. Turns out talented people perform better when they believe effort actually matters. Who knew? About 6 months later, Ethan requested a private meeting. He looked nervous entering my office. "I owe you an apology," he admitted immediately. I leaned back slightly. For what? For benefiting from something unfair. That honesty genuinely surprised me. Ethan continued quietly. "I convinced myself I earned everything because it was easier than admitting the system favored me." For several seconds I just looked at him. Then finally, "What matters is whether you understand it now." He nodded slowly. "I do." And honestly, I believed him. The strange thing about power is that it reveals character quickly. Some people become cruel once they finally gain authority. Others become thoughtful because they remember exactly how powerlessness felt. I tried very hard to become the second type. A year later, Norvale became one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the region. And the funniest part? The same executives who once ignored women in leadership suddenly praised inclusive operational culture in interviews and shareholder meetings. Corporate hypocrisy never disappears completely, but progress still matters. Sometimes I catch Oliver watching meetings quietly now while younger women confidently lead presentations around him, and occasionally I wonder whether he truly changed. Honestly, I don't know. But I do know this. The man who once laughed at the idea of women competing for leadership now spends every day working under one. Me.